45, 50 minutes.
45, 50 minutes.
Starting now and ending at...
So let us start with this session, focusing on how we may strengthen the internal controls. The control auditing framework has several components. In other words, the internal audit functions that are introduced, and Kathleen will open this discussion based on how they have progressed in enhancing and strengthening internal controls in the Belgian governance system. Kathleen, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you for joining the workshop on strengthening internal controls. First of all, I would like to go through the main concepts with you on the public internal control framework, consisting of the internal control itself, the risk management, and then the role of the internal audit function. I would like to discuss with you the model of the 3 lines of defense. In my opinion, this is a very good model because it illustrates the different roles and responsibilities in the public internal control. And then we will look more into how to install public internal control in practice, how we did it in Belgium, because of course we talked already a lot about more theoretical things, but how do we implement and strengthen internal control in the field within the ministries? And for that, we developed a practical tool. It's a tool to assess where do we stand in the field of internal control, and we'll discuss that at the end of the presentation. I will try to go a bit quick through the slides, that we have enough time to have an interactive discussion afterwards. So first of all, internal control. In Belgium, we are obliged to follow the COSO framework. So, as I already stated this morning, we have a royal decree on internal control that states that every manager of the ministry has to develop his internal control system, and this internal control system has to be based on the COSO model. This COSO model is, in my opinion, a very good framework, but it remains a framework. It gives the main components that you have to develop to have solid internal controls. For instance, when we look at the COSO cube, we have in the front all the components that you have to develop to have solid internal control. Starting by the control environment, the most important one, but also the most difficult one and the most challenging one. How do we develop awareness within our organization? How do we make sure that management is convinced and aware of the need of internal control? Then we have to have a systematic risk assessment. We have to develop control activities, and we have to make sure that information flows throughout our organization. And in the end, we have to make sure that the system is adapted, that the processes are adapted with the information that we gather, that we make the right adjustments. Now, why do we develop internal control? Internal control is not just a process that we develop just to do something else. It is to better perform. And that is why you see on top of the cube the control objectives. We want to make sure that, first of all, our operations function in a good way, that we work efficiently, effectively, economically. We want to make sure that our information that we report is reliable, that the management has the information at the right time, and to take the decisions that they have to take. And then, of course, compliance. In a government context, compliance remains important. We have to make sure that we work according to the existing rules and regulations. So the COSO framework also gives a very good definition of what internal control is all about. They say that internal control is a process. This is very important. It is not just something that you do, it's not a one-shot off. It's something that you have to integrate within your daily business. So it is something that you have to do all day, like a process, like your operations within your organization. It is affected by everyone within the organization. Everyone has his responsibility. The staff has the responsibility to do the internal controls, to execute internal controls within their processes, their responsibilities. And then there is the management who will supervise, who will look whether the internal controls are well implemented and followed up. Now, the main objective of internal control is to provide reasonable assurance on the achievement of the objectives. As I said, it's not something that we just do to be compliant. It's something that we want to do to make sure that by the end of the day, by the end of the year, by the end of our management plan, we achieve our objectives. I already talked about the three internal control objectives, so it's related to the operations, to the reporting, and to the compliance, to be compliant with existing rules and regulations. Now, internal control focuses on the mitigations of risks by implementing internal controls. So we will look during our process where risk may occur and what can we do to prevent that these risks will occur. There is another framework and another main aspect within internal control, and that is risk management. What is the difference between internal control and risk management? Well, the word says itself, it's about management, so it goes a bit further than just only internal control. COSO also has a model on risk management. It's the COSO ERM framework, the COSO ERM Cube of 2004. And it is based on the original COSO Cube, but when you look at it, you see that it is a bit more into detail, that they have added certain aspects. For instance, when we look at the different components, we see that we also have here the component of the objective setting, which is, of course, a responsibility for management. We talk about risk management here. We want to make sure, and that is something that we see especially in a public sector context, we want to make sure that our objectives are well translated throughout our organizations. Objectives have to be clear, have to be smart, and they have to be relied to the objectives up to the very operational level. There has to be a clear link in the objective setting. On top of our cube, we see that we also have the dimension of the strategy. Oh, I see there is something wrong with the slides. Okay. We have there the strategic objective control, meaning that management also has to think whether the objectives still are accurate, whether they still fulfill the mission, and whether this translation throughout the organization still functions as it should be. So also here we have a definition. It doesn't differ much from the original definition, because risk management is also a process. It is not something on top of our daily processes. It's not a project. It's something that we do throughout daily business. It's a process affected by everyone within the organization, just like internal control. But here we see two specific responsibilities, two responsibilities that are linked to the risk management, namely the responsibility of the board. In a public context, it should be the minister who will define the risk appetite of the organization. So the minister should mention what risk he is willing to take in the sense that the manager can take that with him when he makes up his management plan and translates his objectives throughout the organization. The management also has a specific responsibility. He has to set, senior management has to set a strategy. This is also very much linked, of course, with the pyramid of the objective setting. Also here we have a main objective, also providing reasonable assurance on the achievement of objectives, but it goes a bit further. It's also about managing the objectives, looking whether this pyramid functions good. We see that because we added this dimension of the strategy on top of our COSO cube. Now, where internal control focuses on mitigating risks, we see here that we will focus on managing risks and deploying opportunities. A risk can also be an opportunity, so we will be more proactive and we will see whether we can use these risks to evolve in our organization. Then we have the role of internal audit. Internal audit comes on top. Senior management cannot control every activity, every file within the organization. So senior management will need a tool that provides them assurance on, does the internal control system that I have developed, does this function as it should be? So therefore we have our internal audit function who will not look at the operations but on the internal control system itself, whether the internal control system that has been developed functions as it should be. In Belgium, we are obliged, and I heard that this is also the case here in Greece, we are obliged to follow the IPPF framework of the IIA, which consists of two main parts, as you may know. The mandatory-based principle part, which states all the principles that should be followed when you want to develop a professional internal audit function. And then the supplemental guidance, which details more for certain aspects on internal audit. So what is the role of internal audit? It provides an independent and objective activity. It is an independent and objective activity. This is, in my opinion, the most important one on when you look at the requirements of internal audit. It should be independent and objective. An auditor should be able to give his opinion in an objective way. In a government context, this may be a problem because often we see that auditors are attached to the senior management level, which may, of course, be a danger for the objective position of that auditor. We have, as an auditor, two main activities. We have to provide assurance to management, but also to the board, to our minister. We have to provide assurance that the internal control system works as it should be. We give an opinion on that, and we also formulate some recommendation how we can approve. How we can approve. Then we can also provide consulting services. We can give advice. Our senior manager can ask us proactively to do a mission on a project, on a process when problems has occurred, so we can provide an advice. But here it is very important that we do not take up responsibility. An internal auditor should never take up management responsibility because, of course, this may endanger afterwards his objective position. If you have to implement something and then afterwards give your objective opinion, this is something that will not work. So internal audit provides an objective opinion by evaluating the functioning of the internal control, the risk management and the governance. So the internal control we already discussed. It's about implementing internal controls on the operational level and on the management level. The risk management going a bit further and also taking into account opportunities and managing risks and objective setting. And then the governance, which is also very much related on how the management directs and sets the tone at the top at the organization. So these three aspects are being evaluated by our internal audit. Now, in practice, we see that often internal control and risk management is being evaluated. Governance is much more sensitive, of course, and we in Belgium also, we started by doing audits on internal control and risk management and much less on governance. I think it's important to first gain the confidence of management before you go into these processes of governance. Internal audits, of course, has to work in a systematic way. This is also something that is very much stressed in the standards. Then let's take a look at the 3 lines of defense model. As I said, I think it's very good because it defines the different roles and responsibilities within the public internal control context. First of all, we have our management controls. So it's the staff that does execute within our daily business, they execute internal controls. And then you have the management who supervises in the format of management controls. So the first line of defense is internal control within the ministry, within the organization. They are the risk owner, and it should be clear that it's their responsibility to implement a solid internal control system. The second line of defense is more a supporting function or coordination function. It does not own the risks in most of the cases anyway. They help the management to provide advice on specialized aspects of internal control. For instance, in the healthcare, we have services that focus a lot on quality. So we may have people over there that also work, of course, in the field of internal control, providing the information to management to implement internal control. But they are not the real risk owner, they are more supporting and coordination function.
Kathleen, if I might add something, please.
When we look into the 3 lines of defense model to connect it with Greek reality, in the first line, we are speaking for the operational units at the department, division, and general division level. Let's take the Ministry of Administration, Division of Environmental Policy, Division of Energy. In other words, those implementing the core business of the ministry. For our purposes, the 3 lines needs to be understood in a legal entity. It might be a municipality. It might be an SA, whatever. Second line of defense, and there we've got problems in various countries. Well, in case of a central unit for public procurement contracts, there such department, such segment would produce guidelines without producing contracts, agreements. Or another board relevant for fraud, training. In other words, not directly connected with a specific activity. Those that are not directly connected with the mission in itself of each and every ministry. And third level, of course, we've got the audit units as those that we try to develop, that they check whether the other 2 lines properly perform. The one producing a call for tender needs to be different from the one that shall assess finally the bids, the offer. Or the replacement of the forensic control when either shall be abolished. Okay, now we have a new model, but still the control is there. No problems in terms of procurement, no travel fields without the required supporting documents, because there are key procedures, inherent key procedures, which do not allow disturbances in the regular control, the legal units, the legislation producing units, how do they operate? So the internal audit is there. Off microphone. The remark is of better regulation, it's good, it's bad, but who's implementing finally? Who's legislating at a ministerial level? A strong internal audit control could produce recommendation and change the legislation procedure, the way legislation is produced, the method, and object setting, 230, the law 230, which ministry has applied it? Were you ever invited in a discussion group, let's say, to discuss fishery topics for 30% increase of exports? How shall we achieve this goal? We need to change the framework relevant to aquaculture or whatever, different measures. The internal audit is there and say, objective setting, top, bottom, does not work, as Kathleen described it earlier, and we need to do something to amend it, to correct it. And the supervising bodies, the inspection bodies could work there in the way decisions are made, as opposed to what it is currently done. And again, there's the external audit. And now we're moving towards Parliament. There's a line. We are not speaking about the inspecting bodies. We are speaking about the Audit Council. Those are not bodies falling under the jurisprudence system. They are control bodies, controlling bodies. And you can have a regulator, says RAE, that fall under different requirement compliance. RAE, the regulator in the energy sector, may ask for better standards of transparency for renewable energy sources production, whatever. And in our case, it would be the Secretary General and the Governing Board Committee. In our case, could be the political leadership. And if there was an Audit Council committee, it could be the Secretary General together with general managers and different individuals from the private sector, a certified auditor, a certified general manager, which as consultants would advise the political leadership with regard to risk management issues.
Thank you for that.
Έχω μια άλλη προσέγγιση.
I've got a different approach concerning the existing system here in Greece. The internal audit system began in our country in 2006, in full application as of the end 2012, at a public revenue level. The operation of the relevant department started following ministerial decision in 2012. So, the third line of defense could be this particular department, even though it hasn't been producing results until today. We have the services, the first line. Each services within its capacities, in its daily work, performs a control, an audit. Second line, a way to inspect, to supervise the first line. So the internal audit entrusts to the division by law 3492 everything relevant to the audits, even though this is the second year and we haven't produced anything. The internal audit, essentially, the third line of defense, has a governance body, a body which defines all procedural processes relevant to the third line in relation to the second and the first one. Could we possibly adopt such an approach, irrespective to the restructuring which might follow?
I would like to add to what Ms. Adonopoulou said. I come from the Financial Inspectorate and I was head of internal audit since 2009. And that was the first one that existed in the ministry. Those days, 2009, for the internal audit, we saw it more or less something like a freezer. And I think it's the same way that we carry on. Then we created the General Directorate of Financial Services, as they are called, which will undertake what the IDE used to do, the forensic control audit. Because I have been a financial inspector as well, I can definitely tell you that the person who, or the authority who is being audited to be the auditor, I don't know what is happening. From what I know, abroad there is a very good computerized system. Therefore, the system itself produces the results that something is going wrong. In the specific case, as far as I know, on the first level, where there is the self-control, self-audit, such computerized system that will show you what must be audited from the second or the third level. Perhaps we should look into this matter and see how to address it. I think we are touching upon two different things. The first is the fiscal audit and the ex-ante and ex-post model with the Commissioner's Agency and the IDE, as we know them, and how the financial services need what kind of processes, IT systems, training in order to go smoothly from one model to the other. And although there were clear messages that we would go that direction, so far the administration internally is not ready yet, and what Ms. Petropoulou said is a very good observation. Why? Because in Greece, what does that really mean? And it's not just a slide. What could be the third line of defense? We have the particularity that we have the inspection bodies, the General Division of Internal Audits, and which played an external role to the operation of the organization, and how this system, the second line of defense, the corporate services, to be the units of internal audits, if all the services, the head of the division of personnel, overtime, traveling expenses, whatever. And third line of defense, to have all these external audits that are under the executive authority, but they are not in the external audit and supreme audit councils. And if in this third line of defense, which is a proper approach for our reality, to be these external actors who are always under the government, that is to say, the inspectorate bodies, and the role of the General Accounting Office with the fiscal inspections, which we can look into. But the process of fiscal and fiscal transactions, because we include everything in there, tax, fraud, corruption, and that is where we lose the game, perhaps. It's a different issue that has to do with proper management and how you can check what is the best model for Greece. But in this framework, you cannot solve the problem on whether it is good or bad and how it should go forward by replacing the traditional model of fiscal audits ex ante and with a model of bureaus of commissioner.
In our internal Greek challenges.
I learn a lot about the Greek context now too. Now, I will go a bit quicker through the presentation, but something that is still important and that I hear now also during the presentation is that this three line of defense model is very interesting because you can map your different actors on it, and then you can see where the responsibilities are and where there are eventually gaps in the system. So that may be a very good exercise to do so. The three lines of defense, what I still want to say is that they all report to senior management. So in my opinion, senior management is the main stakeholder of public internal control. They are not only responsible, but they are the main stakeholder in the sense that they have to capture all the information and do something with it. They have to adapt and adjust the system where necessary. The third line of defense will also report to a more higher level to give assurance that everything within the ministry is under control. So as I already mentioned, the strength of this model is that it defines very clearly the responsibilities. So maybe you can do the exercise the other way around and look what are my actors and what are the different responsibilities and try to put them on this model. Because we did that also in Belgium, and we noticed then that it is very difficult to put, or maybe impossible to put our financial inspection on this model. Because these first two lines are internally within the ministry. And now our financial inspection is attached to our Ministry of Budgets. So you cannot place them in the second line because they are not attached to the senior management of the ministry. Maybe I will switch now to the concept. How did we implement internal control in practice? Well, I already mentioned internal control is a process, but to implement it, you can use it or you can do this in the format of a project. What is the advantage? You have a strict timeline, you have a beginning, you have an end, and at the end of the project, you should have, at that time, have a structurized internal control system. Because even at an implementing phase, you always have already parts of internal control that are available. So it's about mapping these things and making sure that the gaps are filled. So we did that in Belgium, and just to illustrate, I think it's a bit small to see, but the main idea here is that we first had a project to make sure that we have a documented, structurized internal control system. And when this exists, then you can go to the process phase where you enhance the system during daily life business, during the process, the management cycle. Starting implementing means also agreeing on the methodology, which is the timing frame that we will use, where are the responsibilities. We saw that it is very good to have a steering actor, an actor that supports all the initiatives. This can be in the format of methodology, providing guidelines, but it may as well be that these supporting services go into the field and help the people within the ministry to develop their internal controls. You also have to make sure that you talk about the same things. When we started implementing internal control within the ministries, we always started by a sensitizing campaign for management and for staff, explaining what internal control is all about, what internal control is not all about, how we will do the risk identification, give the different options and let management choose. For instance, in the beginning, we did a lot of brainstorming sessions with management to start by identifying the risks at a very high level within the organization, and then we went down up to the operational processes. A good practice that we also notice is that describing the processes and the activities is also very good, because then these documented information you can use to do risk identification and implementing the internal controls, see where there are already internal controls available and where the gaps are. Of course, when you develop internal controls, you have to take into consideration the risk benefits. Not all internal controls are feasible. You can take into account inherent risk and residual risks, but my proposal would be to keep it simple in the beginning. Don't try to put all the information in your documented internal control system from the beginning. It's better to start high level with not too much information, for instance, starting only with residual risks, because inherent risks are also very difficult for people to understand and to evaluate, because they have to abstract from all the existing control measures, and it is not also so easy. And then afterwards you can go deeper. Where the highest risks are, you can go and develop your internal control system further on. So just another word on our practical tool that we developed. It is something that we use to measure the as-is situation. It is in fact based on the new COSO model. COSO also developed a new COSO cube. In fact, the cube remains the same, but for each component, they provide now an attributes, and these attributes explain what the component consists of. And we used these attributes, we translated them into questions, and with this questionnaire we ask our management or our staff to evaluate themselves on a scaling from 1 to 5, and then you have an overview of the existing internal control system, and more importantly, you see where the gaps are, where there are still weaknesses in internal control. So this can serve to prioritize your action, where you want to start or where you want to put the accent for the next years. This is something that we use. I propose now that we leave the floor for discussion questions. I prepared some questions for you, but I'm open to other questions, of course. My first question to you would be, internal control, internal audit, it's a bit the story of the chicken and the egg. What, in your opinion, would be the most important part? And if you would have like 100 euros, how would you invest it in the current situation? Your 100 euros, would you invest it in internal control or more into internal audit? Willing to take the floor?
Στην πρώτη ερώτηση,
Unfortunately, there is no sound in the interpreter's booth. There is no sound in the interpreter's booth. Microphone, please. If there is no microphone, there is no sound in the interpreter's booth. Repeatedly, first of all, Ruska Zoe, General Secretary from Public Revenue, you repeatedly said that after defining the most important objectives of internal audit is to find out the risks that may arise, and when the report from the internal auditor comes, then he can go further into the risks, detecting the risks. Could you please explain more specifically what do you exactly mean? Can the internal auditor make a specific report, a statement? Because if not, then these risks are in doubt and cannot probably be addressed by the organization further on. How do you really mean this thing? And secondly, in your country, the Department of Internal Audit Control of the Ministry of Finance, is it under the political leadership or in the structure of the organization?
On the first question, I think that the role of internal audit is very much linked to the maturity level of internal control. Coming back to my first question, I think that internal control is the first line of defense, is the main issue. If you have a very low level of maturity on internal control within your organization, then it's very difficult for internal audit to provide assurance. They will have to provide assurance that there is no assurance. So in my opinion, in that case, it's more important that internal audit plays the role of providing consultancy services. But about your question, how we are structured in Belgium, we have no link with the political level. Our new centralized internal audit service is attached to our audit committee, and our audit committee consists of non-executive members. So it's 7 independent members, so there is no link with the executive level. And administratively, we are attached to the Ministry of the Prime Ministry. But this is only about the budget, because we have our own budget, so we have to have like a format to have administrative attachment, but even for the evaluation of the Chief Audit Executive selection, this has all been done by the Independent Audit Committee. I'm not sure whether I answered your first question.
And who is a member of the audit committee?
There are 7 independent members coming from private sector, selected for a period of 6 years. And in fact, the selection is done by an independent agency, but in the jury there are members of the audit committee.
Να πάμε, Ειρήνη, θέλεις για την ερώτηση που έκανε η...
Very quickly. The 3 lines of defense model that we use in the projects that we are doing right now in Italy, North Africa and Latin America, for the, let's say, for the Greek reality and the French model. The first pillar, which is DOI, personnel divisions, operational divisions, the risk owners, as we call them, the internal audit, and we go to, which is the second pillar. These 2 things together are the line of defense. And then we have the sectoral inspection bodies, financial inspection. All these constitute a system of an integrated internal control system, and that's how we have the 3 line of defense. And externally we have the supreme line institution, and of course in a federal form we can have structures and oversight mechanisms within the Congress, the Parliament, and always the difference is that we are on the level of ministry. You see our ministry there, the legal entity, the independent authority. Here we have usually an interministerial character. We remain still in the executive, but here we go to the legislative. That is mechanisms of audit that go to a different form of authority. My question is the proposals that the system of internal control do they make the government bodies to be committed and binding, or the government bodies can go further and propose something different? How committing, how binding are for the government the proposals that are being made by the internal audit system? Can they be overcome by the government? Let's say the government does not take them into consideration and make their own decision.
Oh, sorry. We do have a follow-up on the recommendation.
Όλες οι αναφορές και οι προτάσεις ακολουθούνται από την Επιτροπή Ελέγχου, άρα η ανώτερη διοίκηση πρέπει να φτιάξει ένα σχέδιο δράσης το οποίο θα...
And we will, the Internal Audit Service will see whether this action plan fulfill the recommendations. And yes.
And even for the government, if there is a recommendation from IRINI that the legislation on public works should change because there is a significant fraud and corruption risk.
Then we will mention that to the political level, but within our audit universe, there is no the political level is not in it. So cabinets are not audited by our centralized internal audit service. So these are recommendations that, in my opinion, they will go to the political level, but they also have the final responsibility. If they say, okay, this legislation, in my opinion, is good, is sufficient, then it's their responsibility. I think this is above the responsibility of the Internal Audit Service. The Internal Audit Service works to report information to the political level, but of course the final responsibility remains within the political level. So I think that the Internal Audit can play a role in advising, informing them, but of course they do not have the responsibility over political decisions.
Νομίζω, Ειρήνη, ότι θα απαντάτε και στο Βέλγιο.
I think in Belgium they have the phenomenon that some proposals are not being implemented or adopted by the political leadership. We are not the only ones. If there is no other question, then we can go to the specific questions. If I understood well, you said that some audits are not possible to take place, or it is better not to take place. I think you said that at the end of your speech. Microphone, please. No.
I meant was that you have internal control, you have risk management, and you have governance. But governance already touches on how senior management directs the organization. And we see that this is a very sensitive topic. So what we did is we first focused on risk management and internal control. So we provided advice to senior management on these topics. And then by doing that, we tried to gain the confidence of the senior management. I think it's very difficult to start as a new audit service and directly go towards those governance processes, and because I think it will be perceived as criticism, that you first have to make sure that you have the confidence of management before you start doing the audits on governance processes. But of course, it's not something that you can't do. It's just a question of practice, pragmatism, perhaps, yes.
Αν αναφερόσασταν εκεί, η Κατλίν είπε ότι
Kathleen said that prioritization, in order to gain the confidence of the political leadership and to take that they focus on risk management. For example, when you say that I want to increase employment in the young people, and I have three policies: financing of insurance stamps, payment of the state's programs, how these policies have been mapped so that you can achieve the best possible result. For example, in this case, the political leadership of the employment agency or the Ministry of the Employment will achieve its targets. And if you have put the proper control activities so that there is not a ghost institution that will take the money but will not provide the services, or it's being paid for 20 people and they provide services for 5 people. And perhaps they are delayed in auditing governance. How did you come to the point that my priority is to fight unemployment, and you chose among the policy tools the funding for the insurance stamps or the funding of businesses who employ people under 25 years old, which is not the same with the policies that we have in the market, and that is the internal audit that will do evidence choice. If you want, for example, to increase the number of people that will go to primary school in Peru, you have to follow some different processes, build buildings, train teachers, and so on. So if there is a politician comes that I will increase 50% the children that will go to primary school, there is a huge risk that the plan is going to fail, and inform him that with the money you have to focus first of all on the creation of, on the training of teachers. But for the Greek reality, we open up a huge spectrum and we go into operations of mature internal audits. Kostas. My name is Souliotis from the Inspector's Body of Public Administration. 2 questions. And try to put them in the Greek reality regarding internal audits. You said, in answer to a question, 2 questions before, that in the Belgian model, the units of internal audit are under the audit committee. In the Greek reality, I suppose I guess that you have such committees in every ministry. I want to ask, they are in every ministry because they have different standards of audit. Under this system, over this system, is there a harmonization committee, for example? And talking about the Greek reality, the internal audit units, we don't know where they will report to. Perhaps the political leadership. And in this framework, in a previous discussion that took place 2-3 years ago, if there would be the need to establish such audit committees, this was considered that it is something that it's not necessary. Therefore, inspection committees, and if it works for you properly, and whether it gives you a picture of some kind of independence, because here the authorities are independent, or the professional integrity of the auditors. The 2 are the most important words here: independence and professional integrity. In your system, these are being guaranteed. In the Greek system, the way that it has been structured, who is going to guarantee the independence of the internal audit unit and the professional integrity of the auditors? And secondly, the Greek reality, one could imagine a unit of internal audit in Greece, and at which stage of evolution to put in the report that it's going to publish, right in the beginning, the risks involved. Because the risk management is the most important thing. Could you say, for example, to the Ministry of Labor today, in the framework of the fiscal consolidation, look, these allowances puts the system into risk, and who is going to undertake the political responsibility, and who guarantees in a unit of internal audit to set these issues that are under the political leadership decisions?
Okay, first of all, the question on the audit committee. Well, since we in Belgium, we have a centralized common internal audit committee, there is less need for a kind of harmonization unit, because of course we are already obliged to follow on internal control the COSO framework, and on internal audit the IPPF framework on internal audit. So in that case we have already quite strict standards, so harmonization is maybe not so, or the requirement for harmonization is not there. When it comes to reporting, I think it's, as I stated during the presentation, for me it's important that senior management receives the reports, because they have to act upon it. Of course, also the minister himself or herself should be informed. We have a 3-double reporting line. The reports will be sent to the manager, the senior manager, to the minister, and to the audit committee. Audit committees, of course, are only useful when they are independent themselves. They have to safeguard the independence of the audit function, but therefore, of course, they have to consist, the merely part of the members of an audit committee should be independent, non-executive members, because otherwise you create another governance body from within the organization who will not be able to supervise the independent position of the internal audit. So I think this is the key. You should have, the merely part of the members of the audit committee should be non-executive members. And then concerning the risk, I'm not sure whether I understood that question very well. Who will take up the responsibility on the risks? Was that the question?
Yes. Is it a political decision, or is it a decision under the advice of a consultancy bodies? I mean, when there's a risk, who's going to make the decision concerning such risk? The internal audit body operates at a consultation level. However, vis-à-vis a risk, the political decision is important. The remark of Angelos is off microphone.
The findings of an audit report are actually mapping down some risks concerning a policy choice, whether the political senior management is obliged to follow up the risk. Decide differently.
Yeah. It's everyone within his responsibility.
Ανάλογα με τις αρμοδιότητες του καθενός, οι κίνδυνοι μέσα στο πλαίσιο το διοικητικό είναι κάτω από την ευθύνη του senior management. Αλλά αν αφορούν νομοθετικά ζητήματα, τότε προφανώς ερχόμαστε στο πολιτικό επίπεδο. Οι συμβουλές δίνονται σε ένα επίπεδο μόνο. Two more questions and then we'll take a break, says Angelos. Metaxas from the Ministry of Education, the Independent Internal Audit Department. It is clear that the most important is the control and not the audit. Why? Because audit involves that it assures the adequacy of the system, if it is adequate or not, which is fundamental. However, we are speaking in the memorandum that we need to enhance accountability and transparency, and yet the system relevant to the education of civil servants presents problems. The Audit Council should have standard reports for all issues, and everything should be posted on the internet. However, we need to go to the institute to get statistics. Once we've got good reports for all issues, objective targeting, objective setting, and so on and so forth, for all civil servants, all managers are very well aware of all those issues. That once this is established, we need to focus on other functions. Currently, in the public sector, we've got a conflict between legality and intentions. We are speaking about performance, efficiency, effectiveness, and so on and so forth. Those are well-legislated principles. However, this control in terms of legality, is it controlled? We live in a country where whatever you may do, then you come across a mirror relevant to purposes and to intentions. Concerning the training and the internal control, well, Mr. Hunt shall produce a report. Both the leadership, the executives, the staff need to understand the importance of audit and control, and the staff itself needs to be well aware of, and the qualifications, CIA, CCAP, the certified fraud examiners, where we had a very intensive course. When was that? In New York? A week? 2 weeks? This seminar in New York? 4 days, a very strong certification in New York, so everything shall be in the report. However, the NEP, the National Institute, the training models, well, we need to work more and put them in the framework of the specific project. Patouris from Internal Audit of the Ministry of Finance. You are from the Secretariat General? Yes, from the Secretariat General. I consider important that the internal audit be included at a high senior management level in the design of procedures so that we become more proactive. Currently, we work in the aftermath. After having something implemented, we are invited to intervene to resolve a problem at an administration circular level. However, if there was a unit well integrated in the administration, providing counseling, advices, it would be better. However, we are invited in the aftermath. The internal audit needs to be there before decisions are made, not in the aftermath, to operate proactively, and mainly in the banking sector, when banks sign agreements, or in the case of outsourcing, when actions are assigned at external bodies, well, then you need to have a prior assessment, and not be invited to intervene in the aftermath. There, the internal audit can be extremely useful.
Thank you for that question. I totally agree with that. And as a matter of fact, we are now looking on, we're working on with a risk-based audit planning, and we are now looking how we can, in fact, introduce more proactively evaluations on projects, on processes before they are developed, because in fact it is better to improve before implementing than doing it afterwards. But yes.
Because if a process, όταν μια διαδικασία.
When a procedure is implemented, it is very difficult to have it changed. The benefits here might be multiple when you are proactive. Once something is in place, well, everything is over. However, we got proposals and they remain non-implemented. If we had our proposals integrated in the planning, it would be better. The IPPF framework, with this mandatory guidance, answered to your question. The auditor does not draft himself. His role is well described. While reforming a procedure, the internal auditor, together with the conclusions of previous audits, may operate as a consultant of the operating unit, drafting something, let's say, for public procurement, and may give advice as to how they can bridge the gaps to avoid opportunities for corruption or for low performance. However, the auditor himself, as in Greece we haven't got written procedures, so the auditor himself needs to audit a procedure. He needs to be there so that the procedure is designed correctly from the beginning, to avoid being there in the aftermath after having a procedure already implemented.
To add something on that last question, in Belgium we stress a lot the importance of having a solid coordination and supporting function of internal control within the ministries. So within every ministry we have a few persons who support internal control, and they also play a role at a time when something is developed. They can give their advice. And this is better not to compromise the independent position of the internal auditor, because then this person responsible on internal control, supporting internal control, can give his advice, and then afterwards internal audit can play his role. Thank you.
One last question over there from the colleague. Εσείς το σηκώσετε πριν? Ωραία. Μια τελευταία ερώτηση και πάμε για lunch break.
And then we'll, last questions, and then we'll have a lunch break. Group 3 in here, upstairs, Group 4 of a quick question, says Angelos. The multifarious laws is a problem. Multiple laws. We are directly under the minister, and we control the procedures directly under the ministry. So the point is that there are multiple laws, at least in our ministry. I don't know whether in other ministries they've got similar problems, challenges. So how can we deal, can we cope with all those consecutive, continuous reforms, changes, amendments, changes of roles, of competencies, so that you can finally produce an internal audit report?
I will try to answer it very quickly too then. Also in Belgium we have constantly reforms, but as we have internal control coordinators on the level of the ministries, we also have a centralized coordination function on internal control and legislation on the centralized level, and it is this organ who plays a very important role to sensitize and inform and advise political level on this. But of course it touches again the limits on where are our responsibilities and the responsibilities of the political level.
You want a final remark? No? So ευχαριστούμε πολύ. 2 και 4 εδώ, το 3, επάνω το 4.
Wow.